Hello, my name is James Vinciardi. I've been a respiratory therapist for 6 years, but I've been in the medical field for about 18 years. And I currently work at the Rocky Mountain Regional Health System for the VA Medical Center. That was Missing Persons with their song Words. That song kind of, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that song, but it just seemed appropriate. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about communication and teaching with patients who have low or non-literacy status. So here are my objectives. Discuss the importance of identifying patients with low literacy status. Describe what changes to make in our communication when teaching these patients. Describe teaching strategies recommended for these patients. And discuss the use of learning styles when teaching these patients. So here we go. Before I go any further, I just want to review the case study we worked off of. Working in a medical office with a physician's assistant, you are aware that patients come from a variety of different backgrounds, ethnicities, and cultures. One day while you're at work, you meet an 80-year-old Mr. Johnson, who is now retired after working many years in construction. After reviewing his history, you note that he has several chronic diseases, including hypertension, hyperlipidemia, and kidney disease. You also note that his hypertension is not well controlled. Speaking with Mr. Johnson, you find that his affect is quiet and somber. He only answers questions in 1 or 2 word responses, and often he appears confused when asked if he has any questions for you. And he replies, "I'm a little embarrassed to say it, but you've been using a lot of words I don't understand." You then politely apologize to Mr. Johnson that you were unaware that he was not comprehending a lot of what you were trying to say. How big is a problem of illiteracy in the United States? Well, recently I read a piece in the New York Times that described someone who was illiterate. She would ride the subway every day with a newspaper in front of her, because she didn't know how to read. But she was so embarrassed about her inability to read that she would often use this newspaper just in front of her just to make it look like she was actually literate. When you're communicating with someone who is illiterate, it is likely that you won't even know it. People who are illiterate are not likely to eagerly tell everyone that they can't comprehend written language or medical jargon. Instead, they just suffer in silence. Unfortunately, the average American can only read at a 9th grade level. People in 2 to 4 year schools can communicate at a much higher level than that. So it's likely that our speech, while perfectly clear to us, is unintelligible to others. People who are illiterate tend to need health services more often. They also draw the highest healthcare costs. They're readmitted more often. And tragically, the children of illiterate parents are likely to suffer similarly. So here is a few myths that you should know about people who are illiterate. Myth number 1 is that they're stupid. In truth, many have average or above average IQ ratings. Myth number 2 is that they can be recognized by their appearance somehow. And the truth is that doesn't make any sense to me. Appearance alone is not really reliable, and there's no appearance that really tells someone that someone else is illiterate. Myth number 3 is completion of school correlates with literacy. And in truth, school years completed overestimates reading ability by about 4 to 5 grade levels. Myth number 4 is that most illiterate people are foreign born, or they're poor or a minority status. But in truth, most illiterate Americans are from diverse backgrounds, but the majority of them are white or native born. And the last myth that I'll discuss is that most will admit when they don't understand or can't read. And the truth is, just as I described the person on the subway reading the newspaper, Most are ashamed of their reading deficiencies and they will do anything to hide them. So how do you identify someone who's illiterate? Well, because they try their best to hide their illiteracy, it can be hard to discover that someone can't read. So here's a few clues to determine if someone is illiterate. Remember, someone who is illiterate will almost never come out and announce that they can't read. Someone who can read but can't understand medical jargon may be equally silent. That's why it's important to speak in plain, everyday English when speaking to anyone, literate or not, because you can't really tell who is literate and who isn't. Remember my story about the woman on the New York City subway who opened a newspaper on the train every day just so people wouldn't think she's illiterate? They will go through a lot of effort just to hide their illiteracy. So once you've figured out that someone is illiterate, you have to change your communication style a little bit. And here's a few things that you need to do to make sure that you're instructing them in a way that they can comprehend. First, most importantly, you have to establish a trusting relationship with the patient. If you don't accomplish this first step, no teaching will be effective. You can start by just trying to get to know the patient on a more personal level. I can tell you that if you're lucky enough to be working at the VA like I do, this step is going to be easy, because the best thing about working for the VA is you get to talk to all the veterans and listen to them, and they're a really interesting group of people. Anyway, I digress. Secondly, use the smallest amount of information possible to accomplish the predetermined behavioral objectives. Stay within the most important points. Don't overwhelm the patient with extraneous information. Third, make points of information as vivid and explicit as possible. Explain everything in common living room language with no medical jargon. Fourth, teach one step at a time. This goes back to what I was saying before about not overwhelming your patient with too much information at once. Next slide. Fifth, use multiple teaching methods and instructional tools that require fewer literacy skills. Obviously, handing them someone who is illiterate a pamphlet is not going to be very effective, so you have to communicate with them verbally and demonstrate, draw pictures. Using text that they can't read is only going to discourage them. Sixth, allow patients the chance to restate information in their own words and demonstrate any procedures being taught. And use teach-back teaching. That's been shown to be really effective, and then you will know if they grasp the concept or you need to do more teaching. Seventh, keep motivation high. If they can't work through their problems, they're going to get discouraged and give up. And don't let that happen, because this could be the only chance that this patient has to get this information before they go back to their routine of silently suffering their misunderstanding. Eighth, build in coordination of procedures. That means tailoring and cueing. Tailoring means associating new behaviors with old tasks. For example, coordinating medication administration with meal times. Cueing means making the behavior on an appropriate time and situation. That would be like making a chart or putting medications someplace where they can't be missed. And lastly, use repetitions to reinforce information. At the right levels, repetition can be a great way to teach or reinforce information. So next we'll get to learning styles. You've probably heard about how people are auditory, visual, or tactile learners. Well, you want to appeal to as many of these styles as possible. As I discussed before, written material is not going to be very helpful, so it will only serve to frustrate the patient. So stick with drawings and verbal communication. If you're lucky, the patient will even want to dig deeper into that information about their disease and medications. And that's why it's a good idea to sit them down in front of a computer and show them how to get to a site like YouTube that has them a lot of information that they can have. They can get it with at their convenience. So wrapping up, illiteracy is a lot more common than people think. Most Americans read at a 9th grade level, and about 20% read at a 5th grade level or below. Illiteracy is associated with more hospital visits, more readmissions, and more expensive medical requirements. So teaching is really important. It's hard to identify people who are illiterate, but once identified, teaching has to happen with the guidelines that I described earlier. Remember, we talked about establishing a trusting relationship using the smallest amount of information possible, make points of information as vivid and explicit as possible, teach one step at a time, use multiple teaching methods, allow patients the chance to restate information in their own words, keep motivation high, building coordination procedures like tailoring and cueing, and use repetition to reinforce information. And that brings an end to my presentation. If you have any questions, my email and my phone number is right here. Thank you for your attention.